Hi everyone, welcome to the June 5th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon. I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to do our usual handicapping. We'll take a look at races from Santa Anita and Belmont Park. Santa Anita on Saturday, they're running two major stakes races. Well, actually three, but two Grade 1 races that we'll talk about, those being the Santa Anita Derby, prep for the Kentucky Derby, and the Gold Cup at Santa Anita for the older horses going 1.25 miles. And at Belmont, they're back in action in New York this week. This will be the first Saturday card of the meet. We're going to handicap the late pick 5 sequence. There are 4 stakes races on Saturday. 3 of those are part of the late pick 5 sequence, but some interesting races at the end of that. So we'll go through all of that. But Craig, I think as we said on Twitter, we went without the TimeformUS Pacecast this week. Both of our schedules, I know, are changing a little bit at this time, getting a lot more busy with these tracks ramping up. So we're going to shuffle some things around for now, stick with the TimeformUS Forecast, and hopefully bring back the Pacecast in a few weeks.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I enjoy doing the Pacecast. It's always good to talk about, but I much prefer the Forecast. I think the people who listen do as well. It's always more fun to handicap races than talk about ones that have already happened.
Yeah, I agree with that. The handicapping is really the fun part for me. Before we do get into the handicapping, though, I do just want to take a brief look back at last week. And I was looking back at your speed figures from Saturday, and it feels almost like 2 weeks ago, not a week ago, with everything that's been going on this past week. It just haven't been used to so much racing action coming at us every day. But we saw some good performances last week. I mean, obviously on Sunday at Santa Anita, we saw Cece get upset by Fighting Mad. She was the biggest speed figure from last weekend. But I thought Bell's the One was also pretty impressive at Churchill Downs.
Yeah, they were 2 real good for performances from a couple fillies out there. Bell's the One. I do think she got a nice setup, but I was expecting her to run well, but was kind of keeping an eye out on her for future stretching out. But man, did she take advantage. She's really progressed as a 4-year-old, and you know, I'm not sure how much she really needs a super hot pace given that effort. She closed like a train and looked good, and I've already forgotten the name of the horse at Santa Anita you just said. She ran the best figure of the weekend. She had a nice setup. She had a race where the pace projector predicted her to be alone on the lead, and she had actually come in with a really nice speed figure despite being beaten in that Bellafina win last time out. I think she had the top fig in the field, so it wasn't a huge surprise for me that she won, but the way she did it was, and her speed figure was Grade 1 level.
Yeah, she was definitely a horse that the TimeformUS PPs pointed out in that race as a potential upsetter. I wasn't quite convinced, but I would say that she really did run to that prior speed figure, and also the track profile may have helped her a bit because it did seem like the dirt races, the limited ones that we got to see on Sunday at Santa Anita, speed was being helped along a little bit. I don't know if that worked against Cece, but she obviously did underperform. But Fighting Mad, maybe she's just really improved stretching out in distance. Let's stick at Santa Anita and go right into the handicapping where they have those 2 Grade 1 races on Saturday. We'll begin with the one for the 3-year-old. It's the 8th race, the Santa Anita Derby. And this race drew 7 runners, though the focus is really towards the outside with the 2 favorites, Authentic and Honor AP. They were the top 2 finishers in the San Felipe all the way back in March. Seems like a long time ago at this point. They're both coming off layoffs into this race. Authentic has to be considered the horse to beat. I think it's just a matter of whether he continues to maintain that same level of performance stretching out in distance.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's pretty much a 2-horse race on paper. I guess you could give Shoot a puncher's chance in a race like this. The one question I have for Authentic is Shoot going to cause him problems up front? Because he's certainly a fast horse early. We haven't really seen Authentic pass horses in a 2-turn race. So if he gets caught up in a speed duel, it would certainly help the cases of Honor AP. I don't think he is good enough to win, so I think it is between those other 2. The rest of the horses in the field are just a cut below. I think it would be a major shock. I'll be honest up front, this is probably a pass for me because Honor AP is not going to be any kind of price. If we do get that speed duel up front, Authentic's going to be a short price as well. So I'll be watching this one just as a fan, but I think we are going to see a couple good performances in here.
Yeah, I thought the Santa Anita races were not the most compelling wagering affairs, but there are some nice horses in action, so we want to talk about them a little bit. I would give the slight edge to Honor AP. As you said, it's not like he's going to be a much better price than Authentic. They'll be, both the two favorites by a clear-cut margin. But I thought in the San Felipe last time, Honor AP, he was the one coming off a layoff that day. Authentic really did spurt away from him at the top of the stretch, but I noticed that Authentic was starting to shorten stride, even that day in the final 16th of a mile. Some might say that Drayden Van Dyke was easing up on him a little bit. I didn't see that so much. I thought Honor AP was just sort of grinding away and sort of reeling him in a little bit at the end of that race. I think the mile and an eighth does work more in the favor of Honor AP. Maybe that'll narrow the gap a little bit between those two. Really, if I was going to try to make money in this race, the only way that I see to do it is to use those two runners on top of a trifecta and maybe get a long shot like the number one Friars Road in for third. Friars Road is a horse that just seems like one that's going to really appreciate this mile and an eighth distance. Had a bit of a trip at Oaklawn last time. I know that he's a maiden and he's never won a race before, but his speed figures actually stack up pretty well with the other horses in this field, so I think he could sneak into the try at a big price.
Yeah, and he's the one who should be closing late. The others have some more early speed. And, if they try to keep up and actually be competitive in the race, they're probably going to pay for it late. So no problem with trying to get Friars Road in there at all.
Let's now move into the Gold Cup at Santa Anita, formerly the Hollywood Gold Cup. This one's going 1.25 miles for the older horses. This, again, pretty small field, only 6 runners signed on, but really all of them have quite a bit of quality. The 3 main players are Midcourt, Higher Power, and Improbable. And on each of their best days, they'd put on quite a show in this race. I think you just have to kind of wonder a little bit what we're going to get from each of them, because Midcourt's coming off a disappointing loss as an odds-on favorite. Higher Power was just dreadful last time in the Pegasus World Cup, and Improbable has those questions to answer about the distance.
Yeah, I would agree, and they're all shortish prices. They're all 2-1 or lower on the morning line. That's what happens when you have small fields like this. You often don't get those inflated prices on the logical contenders. I'm with you. Improbable, it should be his race to lose. He's run the best figures. He had that really nice race at Oaklawn last time, but again, it wasn't only at a mile, and I do think 1.25 miles is a question for him. If I was going to take a shot in this race, it would probably go outside of those top 3, just looking for a price, and that would actually be Steve Asmussen's Tenfold. He had been progressing pretty nicely figure-wise for us. He's never really popped that big figure in quite a while. He's run some good races, but I actually thought his last race was deceptively good. He only got a 1:13 TimeformUS speed figure, but that was a race with absolutely no pace, that New Orleans Classic that was won by My Standards. I don't love him in here, but I do think he's probably going to drift a little higher than that 6-1 morning line, and I do think he can get the 10 furlongs, and he would be the one for me if he can get up in the 8 to 10-1 range.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was looking at this race, I was originally trying to make a case for Tenfold for all the reasons that you mentioned. Ultimately, I decided that I just couldn't see him as quite good enough to win this race. I suppose that he can win if the other 3, as you suspect might be the case, just don't show up for all the reasons that we mentioned at the top. I just feel like a lot would have to come together for Tenfold to win with the kind of speed figures that he usually runs. But the 1.25 miles is obviously the right distance for him. I'm on the same page as you about those 3 favorites that I strongly prefer. Improbable. I know that most people would assert that he's really best going a mile, and that might be true, but I think people sort of forget that this horse ran really just as well going 1 mile and 3/16, 1.25 miles in races like the Preakness, even his Pennsylvania Derby when he went the 1.1 miles. I know he finished 4th that day, but I think both you and I agree due to his trip, he was probably best and lost an opportunity to win on a day that he should have. So I think that Improbable's form makes it look like he's better at a mile, just due to circumstances and the spots that he's been in. But I'm not that discouraged by his races going longer. And boy, Bob Baffert has put a lot of foundation into this horse. When you look at that work tab, those 7 furlong drills, that mile drill 2 back, I mean, you probably could have made a speed figure for that 1:37 mile that he ran in the morning. So it seems like this horse is really working into this race well. And I just think if he shows up, even with the distance questions, he's just the horse to beat. So I'd put him on top of this race.
Yeah, now don't get me wrong. If he went off that 2-1 morning line, I would bet him for sure. I just don't see any way that's going to happen. I suspect he'll be the favorite in here. I can't see him taking less money and higher power, and probably more in the 6-5 range than that 2-1 that we're going to get. So, and I'm with you. I don't necessarily think he can't get the distance. He's probably better at a mile, but that doesn't mean he couldn't beat this group going 1.25 miles. As you say, he does have some good efforts at these longer distances.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to bet this race, honestly. I kind of would tend to agree with you, but I also didn't think that midcourt was going to be 3-5 in the Santa Anita handicap, so that's obviously a horse they like to bet sometimes, but I just don't think he wants to go this far. Let's move on to Belmont Park, where we're going to discuss that late pick 5 sequence. I should mention we're not going to discuss the pick 6, but I believe it is a mandatory payout in that Empire 6 on Saturday, so you might want to take a look at that. That sequence begins with the other stakes race, the Grade 2 Fort Marcy in race 6. I thought that one was just a real skullbuster. You can make a case for a lot of horses in there, but we're not going to spend too much time on that one. I'll discuss that in my NYRA analysis that I put out on the website every day. But we're going to begin with the Grade 3 Westchester, the 7th race on the card. And this one attracted one of the top horses from last year, Code of Honor, who's making his 2020 debut. He was right up there with Maximum Security as the best 3-year-old of 2019. And I think they're doing the right things, a starting point for him in 2020 by beginning in this one-turn race. I know a lot of us suspected, going all the way back to his Dwyer, that he's a horse that really does relish this one-turn configuration. And he seems to have landed in a good spot first time back.
Yeah, I would think so. I've been waiting for the return of this horse. I'm actually a fan of not shipping over to Saudi and Dubai, which actually turned out to not happen. But I like to see our horses run here in the States, and a good horse like Code of Honor. It does seem like he fell right into the perfect spot. This is a race where I think you have to make a decision if you're going to single him or if you're going to spread pretty heavy. Shug McGahee is trainer. He's not super great first time off the bench. He doesn't always have him fully cranked, but he's not terrible either. And as you said, this does look like a really good spot for him. I tried to find some alternatives in Payne and Mijos, Monongahela, Endorsed, even Backside of the Moon, but I just couldn't really make a case for any of them being able to beat him, particularly given the pace projector has this as a race with a fast pace, which should set up nice for Code of Honor. So for me, I'm probably either going to go to the single route with Code of Honor, or I'm just going to pass the pick 5 and turn it into a pick 4. Luckily, we'll get to see the wagering. I'm going to see just how heavily he's getting bet and if it's worth it, because I don't know if I want to go down with a single in the opening late that's 3-5. I mean, there's really not much point in that, because using him, I'm not sure how much value you're adding to your ticket. But for me, again, none of the alternatives really got the juices flowing. So for me, it's just Code of Honor.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where I would try to really exploit that ABC method by making Code of Honor the only A in this race and having most of my pick 5 play go through him so that most of my money's on him, and then just spreading around with the others as slight backups with thinner tickets the rest of the way. The other horses that I would use as backups, I mean, for me, my second choice would be the number 1 Endorsed. I know Endorsed hasn't run quite as fast as Code of Honor or even some of the other contenders in this race, but I really do think the one-turn mile in the 16th is just perfect for this horse. His one-turn races have been some of his best. It's kind of cool, actually, to think all the way back to when the summer of 2018, when Code of Honor and Endorsed both made their debuts in 2 divisions of the same maiden race at Saratoga. Now here they are again in this Grade 3 event as 4-year-olds. Just kind of funny that they both have been on a similar career track. But I do think that Endorsed, while he hasn't run quite as fast, still has some potential to move forward. Second off that trainer switch to Belmont. So I want to use him. Monongahela, I mean, he's got the speed figures to be right there, but he's just a horse that doesn't seem to have that will to win. I don't see that really changing for Chad Brown, though he is a horse that was in good form even before he was in Jason Service's barn. He ran some high speed figures for Kelly Ruble as well, so he's not one that I foresee the form just falling apart ex Jason Service. And we'll talk about another horse in this situation in the next race. You got to make a decision about these ex Jason Service horses. And then there's Payne. I thought Payne got absolutely perfect trips in his last 2 victories at Aqueduct when he stretched out. This is the furthest distance that he'll have ever tried, but he's in good form right now, so I could see using him as well. But he and Monongahela would be more of C types for me, so I'd have to really get lucky the rest of the way.
I do want to mention Mijos real quick. He ran a really high 126 TimeformUS speed figure. But that's one I've been watching. It is a little suspect. It was a tough one to make that day. There have been a couple horses come back to win out of it, but they've regressed figure-wise, as have some others. So that's one done under review. He still ran really well that day. I mean, if I decide that the figure's 5 points too high, a 121 or a 120, he's still going to look pretty good in here. But I do have a little reservation about that big number last time.
Yeah, and I also wonder how far he wants to go, because it does seem like his better performances come going a little bit shorter. I think that 7 furlongs worked for him last time. I'm just not sure if continuing to try to stretch this horse out is really what he wants to do. Let's move on to the 8th race, the Intercontinental Grade 3 event, going 7 furlongs on the turf for the fillies and mares. And boy, does Chad Brown have a strong hand in this race. Looking at the morning line that I made, and I think the top 4 choices are all trained by Chad Brown. He's got 4 runners in here, so they are the 4 favorites. I would imagine that Newspaper of Record and Significant Form are going to vie for favoritism. I mean, Significant Form unquestionably had the better 2019 campaign. She won a few graded stakes races. She even won this race last year when she was coming off a layoff, so you definitely know that Significant Form is in the right conditions here. Newspaper of Record, just based on raw ability, she's obviously the best horse in this race, but you really have to wonder what you're going to get from her at this point.
Yeah, she is definitely a quirky horse, and there's some question marks about her. And to further add to that, I really think a horse like Jakarta, who if she goes will cause problems for a horse like Newspaper of Record. We've never seen her really be able to pass horses since her maiden win. I think she passed one horse when it was clearly inferior competition, but Jakarta is a real speed horse. I mean, when you look through her PPs, there's absolutely nothing but ones for the early parts of her races. So I'm against Newspaper of Record. Maybe I would use her as a C in here if I'm playing the pick 5, but she is the one of the Chad Browns who I don't like. Now, that said, this is a race I would probably spread pretty wide, because while I think Significant Form is solid, I mean, I have no real knocks on her, I think some of the 4-year-olds we're going to see in here could really take some steps forward in here. And I'll start with Rose Flower. She's one I really liked last year. I loved her win that she had 2 back when she overcame a really slow pace at this 7 furlong distance. She was moved in the stakes company next time out, wasn't able to get it done. But again, it was a pretty slow pace that day. She didn't have much to run into. And I'm a big fan of Christophe Clement in these 7 furlong races on the turf at Belmont. He seems to do really well in them. Admittedly, she's going to have to take a forward jump in speed figures. But as they're going to talk about with some of the other 4-year-olds in here, like Regal Glory, another one for Chad Brown that I like, and Viadera, who's shipping over for Chad Brown for the first time here in the States. Her time form rating hadn't hit the 110 mark, but all 3 have those red layoff lines in the TimeformUS PPs, which means they've been off quite a while. I think it's been at least 6 months or more. And as improving 4-year-olds, you got to expect better numbers than what they ran in the fall or even the summer of their 3-year-old season. So that's why I'm spreading a little deep, not handing the race to Significant Form or Newspaper of Record, and taking a shot with some horses I think can improve and run better than the numbers they had.
Yeah, I totally agree about those 3-year-olds that are turning 4 in this race. I think there are a number of them that can improve. I do want to I have nothing to add about Significant Form. What you said is true. She's got the proven form. I think she's a deserving favorite in this race. Just nothing clever to say about her. She's the horse to beat. Newspaper of Record, I do want to talk about a little bit. I'll be interested to see if Jakarta runs in this race, because Mike Maker also entered her back on Sunday. I just put in the morning line for Sunday, and she's actually entered against males in another 7 furlong turf race. That seems like a tougher spot, so I would imagine he'll go here instead. But we've seen Mike Maker enter this horse a lot and scratch her, so I'll be interested to see if she actually shows up here. If Jakarta comes out of this race, that would really want to make me reassess Newspaper of Record, because then she becomes the speed, arguably, or she'll just stalk outside of an overmatched horse like Victim of Love, who I don't think is that fast anyway. And that would make Newspaper of Record dangerous because for her, it's all about the trip. I don't doubt that she still is capable of producing top performances. I was watching some of her works down at Palm Meadows, and I mean, she seems like the same horse that she's always been. That May 9th work was really impressive, going around the dogs, 48 seconds. That's really moving. So I think that she still has it in her. I'll just be interested to see how this race comes up and how her trip works out. So I'm not totally dismissing her, but I can't pick her in this race because you do have to have those reservations. As for the other Chad Brown horses, I kind of like Regal Glory turning back. I just wonder if she's quite good enough. I thought Regal Glory did most of her damage against weaker fields last year than some of the other 3-year-olds have been facing. But I'm not totally against her. I can see her, getting into the mix somewhere. The Chad Brown horse that I'm most interested in is the number 1 Viadera. Her European form, I think, is better than it looks if you start to pick things apart, because she handles the 7 furlongs. She could go a mile. I think this is really the right place to start her at. They put her in some of those handicaps right away, and she was toting some pretty significant imposts in some of those races. When she won back on May 24th, she was carrying 136 pounds, giving away 16 pounds to the runner-up that day. She beat that horse again at equal weights in Ireland back in July. I went and watched that race. I thought she was really game to get it done that day. I just don't think she wanted to go the mile and an eighth two back. And then last time, again, they put that 136-pound impost on her, and she had some trouble that day. She was trying to squeeze through inside, got steadied, and just really couldn't finish off that race. I love the way that she's training into this race. She's actually been working in company with Regal Glory down at Palm Meadows, and just seems like she's doing exceptionally well right now. She's got Joel Rosario on board, who's just the best in these 7 furlong one-turn races. So I think Viadera is very dangerous in this race, and I don't think she's going to be among the shorter prices of those Chad Brown runners. And I do briefly want to touch upon the horse that you mentioned, Rose Flower. She's the kind of horse that I was struggling with when I was making the morning line, because based on form, she looks like a 15-to-1 shot, but she had one of those trips last time that you just couldn't miss. I mean, Joel Rosario, I'm very complimentary of him most of the time, but sometimes when you take the kind of risks that he does, things will not work out on occasion, and that's what happened in that Autumn Days last time. He was trying to find a seam inside, and she was just totally stymied in traffic, basically for the entire stretch run, and it's actually pretty impressive that she even got up for third that day because she got free way too late. So she's got more ability than it seems. I'm just not sure if she's quite at this level, but I'll use her somewhere as a backup.
I do want to mention with Newspaper of Record, it does look like she's coming off that long layoff, but she was entered back when this COVID-19 stuff started at Gulfstream. There was nothing wrong with her. They just scratched her due to the uncertainty. There was no real point in getting her a prep race for something you didn't know what you were prepping for. So I'm not really saying that she should be ready to go here for sure. Chad Brown's horses are always ready to go, but this one's been ready to go for a while, and that's a good point about Jakarta, and that's kind of why I said when I did if she goes, because we've talked about her so many times on this show and she hardly ever actually shows up in the gate. So that is a key to the race, and that's one of the first things I'll be checking when the scratches come out on Saturday morning, because I don't think she can win the race, but she certainly will have a big influence on my play.
Move on to race 9 at Belmont. This is the final stakes race on the card, but it's the middle of this pick 5 sequence. The grade 1 Carter going 7 furlongs. This race was rescheduled from back in April. Now it's being run 2 months later, and I'm glad we get it in because you don't get that many grade 1 races in the sprint division on the dirt. And boy, this has turned into a barn burner, having delayed it a little bit because you've got a really strong field here. I mean, Firenze Fire was one of the top sprinters from last year. Performer looked like an up-and-coming 3-year-old. Mind Control just seems to own these 7 furlong races in New York, having won the Woody Stevens and the Hopeful. And you got Vekoma, who's coming back off that impressive return. So where do you begin? I think all of these horses have a big shot at it.
Yeah, this is a deep, contentious field in here, and it's another race I'm going to spread pretty wide. I'm going to tone down in the next 2, and of course I already said about the Code of Honor, because I think a number of horses can win these races. I guess I'll start with Firenze Fire, since he's pretty low on the morning line, and he's the one that has the most questions. And for me, these Jason Service trained horses and Jorge Navarro horses, they're tough. I think you got to look at each one individually, but this is a horse I don't want any parts of. He's won his last couple, but he's been beaten up on inferior competition. He does have some big efforts. His second to Imperial Hinton of Vosburg was a big figure, but honestly, that was a pretty weak race outside those top two. There really wasn't anything else in that race, and I just don't trust his big numbers. We know what Jason Service is charged with, and I believe this horse was even mentioned once. I can't remember for sure, but I don't trust him at all, so I'm not using Firenze Fire. If he beats me at a short price, so be it. The horse who comes in with the best speed figure in here last out is Performer, who ran a huge grade 1 like 130 last time out when he won that Discovery, beating Tax. It was a huge gap back to third. Pretty, not the strongest field after those two, but I do think it was a big effort. But you have to wonder, is he ready to go after 6 months? Again, it's Shug McGahee. He's turning back to 7 furlongs, which this horse has won sprinting. He's won twice, once at 6, once at 6.5, but I have to wonder if he's fully cranked for this, and I'm not sure I love the inside post draw for his comeback in here. So I'm going to use him, but it's going to be more as a B or a C. When you move to the outside horses, Mind Control's the kind of horse that always gets me in trouble. He never looks particularly fast, but he just wins a lot of races. He finds ways to do it. He's looked totally beat a few times the last couple times out, and he just finds a way to win somehow. So he's another one I'm going to be using, but again, it'll be more defensively because I'm not a big fan. Like I said, I think I heard Andy Serling talking about him on Steve Bick's show. He had similar reservations that he's just a horse who he just wins. He's not particularly fast, but he finds ways to get up there. So I'm going to take a shot again. Like, as I play this race vertically, he'll probably burn me again, but I'm not going to use him, but I will use him on pick fives. For me, I do really like Vekoma in here. I like this comeback effort. I like that he draws outside and can kind of see what's going on in front of him. There's not a huge amount of early speed in here. We actually have Firenze Fire on an early lead, and a clear early read on the pace projector, with Vekoma sitting just outside a few lengths back. So I like the trip he's going to get. So that about covers it for me for the short price horses. I don't want to ramble too long, so let me get your thoughts. And then there are a couple more I want to talk about in here.
Yeah, I mean, it is the kind of race that you could talk about for a long time because there are a lot of points to make about even the horses that are just short prices. Firenze Fire, I agree. He's the most difficult call in this race, and I can't blame you for taking that stand against him because you do have to take a stand somewhere. I would probably feel more confident about throwing him out if not for this pace projector, because he's just loose in this race. And breaking from the rail, you've got to think they're going to try to be a little bit aggressive. And I know that he's not been some front runner in the past, but he just seems faster than these early, because for a grade 1 sprint race, there's just not much speed in this field. And I wonder how that's going to play for a horse like Mind Control. I'll get to him in a second. But Firenze Fire, I don't feel comfortable tossing him. I'm actually very afraid of him in this race, because it's not like he's one of these horses that Jason Service got off the claim and suddenly improved. We don't know if he could run for a different trainer. It's sort of a mystery. And we haven't seen too many of these horses go from Jason Service to Kelly Breen. We saw one in action on Wednesday at Belmont, turf horse Hey Dakota, who actually ran fine to be fourth in a really tough allowance race. I don't think I don't think what we've seen so far is borne out that you can just assume that these horses' form is going to fall apart. Like you said, I think it's a case-by-case basis. And this horse, in this case, has fallen into a race where he's fast enough to win, and he's going to work out a perfect trip, so I can't dismiss him. I'm using him. I love Performer. I'm a big fan of this horse. I was just elated to see him win that Discovery with such a gigantic speed figure back in the end of November. We'll see if 7 furlongs off the layoff is going to be too much of an ask for him. I kind of think 7 furlongs to a mile might be the best distance for this horse. He does seem like one that wants to go that 1-turn mile distance. And the way that he progressed last year, I think we finally saw his fully realized form in the Discovery. I wouldn't put too much stock in his speed figures prior to that because Shug was just slowly bringing him along the way that he does. And I thought I was going to be more discouraged by this number 2 post position until I saw the pace projector, and he's actually not shown that far off the front end. And you look back, and this horse actually does have plenty of speed from his sprint races, so I don't think he's really going to get outrun in the early stages. And I was reading Shug McGahee's quotes, and even he was saying that he thinks this horse does a little bit better when they ride him out of the gate and try to get forward, and I like to hear that. So I think Performer is very dangerous, and in some ways he's the most likely winner for me. So I'm using him pretty prominently. Vekoma, I agree with you. He's going to work out a good trip. His return was excellent. I just think he's very dangerous in this race. I'll definitely be using him. Mind Control is sort of the most difficult horse for me to assess. As you were saying, the speed figures don't really point him out as being the fastest horse in this race. He does just have a nose for the wire, and he's been known to win by a nose more often than once. Also, he's the high weight in this race, and I get that because he's got those grade 1 victories, but it's just like penalizing a horse even more that hasn't run quite as fast as the others. So I'm just a little bit wary that Mind Control is going to be basically the same price as all the others, and he does have to get a little bit better. And also, he could be most negatively affected by that pace projector because while he does have the tactical speed to sit close, when they move a little quicker up front, he gets outrun a little bit. I'll just be interested to see how that all works out for him and if he can get it done against this really tough field. But I've certainly underestimated him and paid for it in the past. I didn't love anybody else outside of these top 4. I guess Network Effect has a chance, but this is the kind of race in a pick 5 where I would use all 4 of these horses as A's. I would just try to get through this race. I don't want to take a strong stance with anybody, even though I like Performer. I don't totally trust him off the layoff. So I would just use 1, 2, 10, and 11 as my 4 A's in this race and try to get through it.
The couple other I wanted to talk about, American Anthem, I had actually selected him on the forecast for the Blame Stakes, which he scratched out of. So I'm going to use him lately in here. I give him a shot. The other horse I actually was really impressed with his return last time was Majestic Dunhill. I wanted to make him my top pick. I really liked how he was flying in that race, but looking at the pace now, I was actually on Gino Baccola's show last night, and I was kind of singing his praises. But as I look at it now, he's probably just a C for me because he just comes from too far back. And as you say, he's not going to get a whole lot of pace. But if he wins this race, I do want to have him on my ticket.
I should mention Majestic Dunhill is also one of those horses that's entered back on Sunday against Jakarta in that 7 furlong turf race. So we'll see where he runs. I wonder if George Weaver took a look at this race and said, I don't know, it seems like a tough spot for my other horse. Maybe I'll split them up. But we'll see where these horses end up running. Moving on to the 10th race, got 2 non-stakes races to close out this pot pick 5 sequence. This one is for the New York breds going 6.5 furlongs. It's a non-winners of 1 allowance race. And it's not your typical non-winners of 1 because you've got a horse dropping into New York bred company for the first time, coming over from the West Coast for Bob Baffert. I mean, this race really goes through the number 4 Tail of the Union, who's going to be the favorite here. Based on speed figures, he's got an edge in this race, but you do have to be a little bit concerned because he disappointed as the odds-on favorite off the layoff at Santa Anita last time. You can make excuses for that race, but still, it's been a long time since he ran that impressive debut speed figure.
It has, and what's interesting in this race for me is that we have it predicted as a fast pace on the pace projector, and yet those top 3 horses are still the top TimeformUS power picks. Now, we don't punish horses for being up close on a fast-paced race because speed is still good. We don't want to discourage. There were too many times where you'll see that and the speed of the speed goes on the win. And that could very well be the case with Tail of the Union. For me, he's kind of a must-use, but I don't know if he's a single. I'm certainly not going to single him in here. As you said, that Maiden breaker was a long time ago. I mean, he came off a 600-plus day layoff. Now, I wasn't totally disappointed in that last start. I think the 3 to 5 odds he went off that day were pretty ridiculous. But he ran okay. He almost ran back to that speed figure, just a few points below, despite being wide around the turn in just a 5.5 furlong race. So I'm going to use Tail of the Union in here. Now, I've already spread in the other 2, so I can't spread too deep here. I mean, I don't want to $2,000 pick 5 ticket or anything like that. But a horse who caught my interest outside of the 4 was More Grateful, the 3. He's a horse who last time he was up in that Dream Bigger New York bred stakes race, he was up a little closer than I think he wants to be, but he still ran a nice race to be a well-beaten second. In a race like this where there's more speed, I think he can take that more comfortable position behind, and I'm really expecting a big effort from him, and he's the one as a vertical better that I'm going to key on in this race.
Yeah, Tale of the Union's it's a tough horse to read in this race because he might not have to show up with his A effort and he can still win against this field because the others, they've run some fast speed figures on occasion, but they're not quite at his level. I looked up the stats. Bob Baffert is 40% at NYRA over the past 5 years. So when he ships into New York, he typically means business, whether it's a stakes race or not. And Drayden Van Dyke rode Tale of the Union last time like he needed a race. If you watch the early portion of that race, he didn't come out riding like it was a 5.5 furlong race. He almost was riding the horse like they were going up 7 furlongs. I mean, he didn't seem like he wanted to get forward position heading into the turn, and you sort of need to do that. And he went basically 5 wide around that turn. So I would give him a pass for that race. We'll see how the trip works out here. I think he's the most likely winner, but I agree with you. The interesting horse is the number 3, More Grateful. I was really impressed with his debut effort going all the way back to December. I just liked that a lot. He broke slowly, rushed up, and finished well to almost get it done. And his efforts since then have been fine. I thought that Dream Bigger, as you said, just ran off the screen last time. And he was game to hold on for second that day. And he can certainly come from off the pace, so I think he's going to work out a good trip in here. As for the others, I'll just briefly mention some of these horses since I have opinions about them. The number 12, Financial Stability, will take some money. You can give him an excuse for the 2 sloppy track races in the last 2, I guess. But I kind of feel like his form is just going, just tailing off a little bit. So I wonder if he's still the same horse that we saw last summer. And the number 9, The Last Ace, could take some money in here. I'm going to be interested to see if that speed figure from his debut holds up because we saw the 3rd place finisher Forest Spirit come back and run here on Wednesday and really disappoint. He was nowhere in a maiden claiming race. The runner-up, Mr. Buckley, is running back at Belmont today, so pay attention to how he does. But the Last Ace really had everything go his way on the front end, and that was a track at Aqueduct that seemed to be favoring horses on the rail a little bit, and he did ride the rail for most of his race. So I respect this horse and the fact that he was so well-intentioned first time out. I just wonder if we're going to see that same effort second time out. Let's finish things up with the 11th race on this card. It's a maiden special weight going a mile on the Widener turf course, and got a pretty high-quality maiden event here. I think the focus is going to be towards the center of the field. You got the number 7, Voodoo Zip, who just seems to be stuck at this level. He always runs well. He's certainly earned speed figures that are good enough to win a lot of races at this level, just can't seem to break through. And then we've got the number 6, Lonesome Fugitive for Chad Brown, who comes in off a layoff. He was highly touted in his debut, getting back down to 8-5 odds, but he was just so green that day. So has he gotten it together over the past few months, I think is the question with him.
Yeah, and again, with me spreading early in a couple of these races and quite big, I couldn't come up with anything clever. I tried to make a case. There's a lot of first-time turf horses in here. We got a first-time starter or two. Depends who draws in, if anybody does. But I couldn't come up with anything. I'm curious to hear your opinion on some of these first time out on the turf horses. So if I'm still alive heading into this race, I'm going to live or die with Lonesome Fugitive and Voodoo Zip. Not much to add to what you said about Lonesome Fugitive. There was a lot of greenness in there. He still ran pretty well. He got a 97 TimeformUS speed figure. That was 5 months ago. So if he's improved at all and gets a little more professional, he easily could win this race. The other horse for me is Voodoo Zip. Nothing clever there. He's a horse who's run well every single time out. He's improved his speed figure every time out. And I have no knocks on him. So since I wasn't able to come up with some other alternatives and don't really want to spread too deep in this race, that's where I landed, those two.
Yeah, I think there are 4 horses that can win this race, and if I was crafting an ABC ticket, I'd probably make the 2 favorites the A's. I don't want to lean too heavily on Lonesome Fugitive. He probably has the most talent of anybody in here. It's close, though, because he's got to get a little bit faster. But he was so green first time out that it makes me a little concerned because these Chad Brown horses, when they finally get to the races, they are so well schooled in the mornings. I mean, they've been put through their paces. And for a horse to show up to the races as unprepared as he was for Chad Brown, that's a bit concerning. And you have to wonder if he's going to pull those antics again, because if he does against this field, he could be in some trouble. So I think he's the horse to beat if he gets things sorted out, but that's a big if for me. And Voodoo Zip, yeah, I mean, he doesn't really get me excited. He'll be right there at the end. We'll see if he can finally win a race. He's obviously faced some good horses, having lost to Guffaut by a nose in his second start, but he's just kind of running out of chances. The other two horses of those four that I mentioned, the number 3, Mr. Jaggers, I think you have to include because, I mean, as a 2-year-old, he was running numbers that don't put him that far off of these, and they were turned on dirt last time at Gulfstream. I wonder if Belmont was just giving him a race that day to get fit, because he really is much more turf intentioned from a pedigree standpoint, and the fact they started him on turf last year. He was very well bet in both of those Saratoga races. There was some buzz about him in Saratoga, so if he can finally put things together, I think he's a horse that can easily get on terms with the two favorites. And the one other horse that I could see using is the number 9, Red Flag Alert. I don't usually love first-time starters in these turf routes, but George Weaver's been on a roll so far in 2020. This one's got a turf pedigree on the dam side, and I went back and watched that workout that prompted him to sell for $600,000 back in 2019. He worked a furlong in 9 4/5 seconds and just had a beautiful stride on him. I mean, really looks like a quality horse. He's not starting with Lasix for whatever that's worth, so maybe he needs a race, but there's ability with this horse, so I wouldn't want to let him beat me.
And that's what I was looking for. I was curious of your take on him. The ones who were trying turf, I just tried to come up with, for the first time, I tried to come up with some pedigree plays and just couldn't find them at all. So glad to hear that on the first timer. I do worry about no first time Lasix. That's usually not a good sign. The stats aren't very good, but I haven't looked them up for George Weaver as a trainer, so I will do that after the show and recommend others do as well.
Yeah, and as far as pick 5 ticket construction goes, I think we covered it pretty much as we talked about all the races. I think we're both leaning pretty heavily on Code of Honor, whether you decide to single him or not, or use some backups. I think most of our play is going through him, and I'm going to spread a lot in the Carter. I think I got that sense from you too, although I'm focusing more on the favorites. Spreading also a little bit in the Intercontinental, though I'll try to push those Chad Brown horses that I like, Viadera in significant form, and then try to narrow down that New York bred allowance to mostly the 2 horses that we liked.
Yeah, that sounds about it for me. I think you're going a little deeper in the 10th, but in the last race, whereas I'm going a little deeper in the Intercontinental.
Well, that's it for this week's podcast. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we're not going to do the Pacecast next week. For the foreseeable future, we'll tell you when we're going to get back into the swing of things with that, but we'll continue with this format moving forward. We'll do the forecast every Friday, take a look back at some of the races that really stood out to us from the past week at the top of the show. So look for some more handicapping content next Friday. You can always catch us, remember, on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back at you with another TimeformUS Forecast next Friday.